insulting me, before you react, pause and respond. So the very first thing is listen to what someone is saying. Listen to listen to the criticism. Listen to the critique. Secondly, pause before you respond and do your absolute best to not react. Response is more mature than reacting. Reacting can be a bit immature at times, especially if you don't have a filter, especially, you're just ready to lash out back at someone because you feel like they lashed out at you. Responding is the way to go. Number 3. Hey, entreleader. Happy Wednesday and welcome to the 29th episode of the Leaders Lab podcast. Today, we are going to be talking about the 7 ways to accept criticism without getting defensive. Now, I'm just going to tell you that this is from a personal experience of mine, and not just one, actually quite a few. Have you ever been in a situation where you thought you were doing your best? I mean, you have made so much progress from who you used to be. You used to be a terrible leader, like with a bad attitude, or you used to be the type of leader where, you thought that you had to be like dictatorial. So instead of making suggestions or recommendations, you always made commands. And so you basically went from being that type of person to a better type of leader, to a better individual. Maybe not even just dealing with leadership. It could just be maybe, you're trying to be a better sister, a better friend, a better wife, a better husband, a better spouse or whatever. And despite all your efforts of trying to be better, you still receive some feedback where, the other party is saying that you're not doing well enough, like you're not doing good enough, or they still pick out things that are areas for improvement. And you're just like, well, I'm doing my best. Like you're like, I used to be worse than this. Can you at least just acknowledge the fact that I am doing better? If that's you, I want to tell you, I've been there. Oftentimes when I still receive criticism now, I have to remind myself that not all feedback is bad. Okay. Not all feedback is bad. Even if it seems like you're receiving negative feedback, you have to receive it with the right heart, right? Even if the person who is delivering the criticism is doing it with the wrong intentions. Okay. Now, I don't want to focus on that type of person today, because there are some people who, when they're giving feedback to you, they do try to do it in a way to hurt your feelings. They do try to, criticize you in a way to make you feel less than, for whatever reason. Right. But we're not talking about that type of criticism. We're talking about the type of criticism where, maybe it's from your job, or it is in a relationship, or maybe it's with friendship, or, it could be an organization that you've been volunteering for. It could be anything, but the person delivering the criticism is doing it with the right intent, right? They're doing it with the right heart, the right intention. That's the type of criticism that we're going to be focusing on today, and how to help you accept that criticism without getting defensive. So last week for episode 28, we talked about 3 ways to give constructive criticism to your team as an entreleader. And first, before we did that, we defined what constructive criticism is. And businessterms.org defined it as providing feedback in a manner that acknowledges both the positives and the areas that need improvement, instead of just solely focusing on the negative. And we also said last week that being able to give constructive criticism is a very strong leadership skill to have. We talked about 3 ways to give constructive criticism. And if you remember, the first way was the feedback sandwich. We talked about the positive, negative, and reinforcing the positive. The second way was separating the issue from the individual, right? Not focusing so much on the person, not focusing on the person at all, but really focusing on the problem that needs to be resolved. And then the third way was, don't just criticize, don't just give criticism, but also give recommendations on how to improve. And we also said that mastering the skill of giving constructive criticism can help reach desired results much, much, much quicker than simply pointing out the negative and making someone feel bad. Well, today we are talking about 7 ways to receive that criticism. Whether you are an entreleader or whether you are what we call a team member or a subordinate, whoever, you should have this type of skill. You should develop this type of skill of being able to receive criticism without being offended or without getting defensive. And the very first way to do that is, of course, listen. Listen, many times when we are receiving feedback or when someone is telling us something about ourselves that we don't necessarily like or want to agree with, we shut down. We shut down. So instead of listening intently, automatically we either start like thinking about the words that we want to say in response, or we'll start tuning people out, or just thinking about something else. And honestly, there is something to be received. There's something to be had or to gain from actually listening with an open mind and an open heart. And I know that can be difficult to do, especially when you feel like you're being attacked. Now, again, I want to reiterate the fact that we're talking about receiving criticism from someone who is delivering it with the right intentions, not someone who is, deliberately trying to hurt you, deliberately trying to make you feel bad. And even, of course, what we are sharing today, it can help you receive criticism from that type of person as well. However, like I said, that type of person, especially if they are a leader, delivering criticism in a way to cause harm or to belittle intentionally, that's not okay. That's not okay. And so if you happen to feel attacked, you have every right to feel attacked. But we want to make sure that we are helping you to develop into the professional that you need to be, so that even when someone tries to intentionally cause harm to you or hurt your feelings with criticism, that you still that you're mature in your responses, So the very first thing is listen intently, and when you listen, you're not necessarily listening for the bad things, right? We're not just necessarily listening for things that we can point out and say, well, you were telling me that I was angry and upset, but really I was just a bit frustrated. But this is not why we're listening. We're not listening so we can fight. We're listening so we can improve. Okay. So the very first way is to listen. The second way to receive criticism, the second thing that you need to do is pause before you respond and do not react. There's a difference between reacting and responding. When we react, reaction is like our default. It's like the thing, it just triggers. It's like instant. A reaction is just instant. A response actually, it takes some thought. You think about what you're going to say. You think about what you're going to do when you respond. Reaction sometimes is just it's instant. It's immediate. But that's why I say you should pause first as you're listening before you want to just jump straight in and say something. Pause, even if it's just a second. A second actually can be quite a long time when you are used to an immediate reaction. Pause. And then respond. Do not react, because our reactions are going to display our offense. Our reaction is going to be like, it's going to, first of all, defend our honor, right? When we react, it's like, well, listen, I was XYZ, or, yes, I was upset in the meeting, but that's because, things weren't going this way or that way, or what we basically talked about doing, it was changed at the last minute without even consulting me. Before you react, pause and respond. So the very first thing is listen to what someone is saying. Listen to listen to the criticism, listen to the critique. Secondly, pause before you respond and do your absolute best to not react. Response is more mature than reacting. Reacting can be a bit immature at times, especially if you don't have a filter, especially, you just ready to lash out back at someone because you feel like they lashed out at you. Responding is the way to go. Number 3, ask questions to better understand the feedback. An example here is, and I've been, using kind of the example of someone saying that, oh, you were really, really angry at the meeting, or, you got a little too heated. You were blowing up at people at the meeting. Okay. Now I can understand this is where asking questions to better understand the feedback comes into play. Saying, well, yes, I may have been a bit frustrated at the meeting, but can you give me an example? Like when did you see me really like blow up or go off on, Cynthia? When did you see me go off on her? Or can you explain, like, give me an example of, what you're basically saying that I did? Because you may not even know that you blew up at Cynthia. You might have just been thinking that you were responding to her, just telling her how you felt. But in all actuality, no, you went off on Boo Boo. Like, someone else could see what you may have been blind to because of the frustration or because of how you were feeling at that time. So it's perfectly okay to say, to ask the question, can you please, sure, give me an example of what you're talking about so I can see, so I can have a better understanding. If you're in a relationship with someone or you're getting to know someone and they give you feedback about how you can improve, maybe, they're saying you're a bit moody. For you, this just might be your default because you've been this way for a while. It might just be your default. But for them, they're getting to know you. They're like, look, I don't like the way you did this or that. So you say, okay, I understand what you're saying, but I don't understand, the specifics. Can you give me a specific example so I can understand? I know I said understand like 3 times, but we're trying to ask questions to understand. I want to be able to see what you see. So that way, if it is something that needs immediate correction, I can begin working on that. I can take steps toward improving in that area. So that's number 3. Number 4 is don't just ignore the feedback. Don't just brush it off. Don't just like let someone talk at you, right? To give feedback at you, to criticize at you, but actually let them talk to you. So that way, as they are, as they're sharing their feedback or their critique with you, you can absorb that information. Don't just brush it off. Okay. Now, of course, if it's something where, it's just like, well, that part was just unnecessary. Filter. It's okay to filter out the bad. Okay. It's okay to filter out the bad. But if we're talking about receiving constructive criticism, if we're talking about receiving feedback in a way that it's going to help us better develop or better complete our task or our projects, then we receive it. Don't just brush it off and be like, oh, okay, whatever. I'm not receiving that. I'm not listening. I ain't got to listen to nothing you say. Okay. All of that is unnecessary. All of that is unnecessary. So the way that you can actually receive it is to not ignore it, to not brush it off. You might actually need to take notes. Sometimes when I'm receiving feedback, I take notes with pen and paper, or I'm writing on my phone and I have to let the person know I'm not being rude. I'm not texting someone. I'm not scrolling the internet. I'm not on social media. I'm actually taking notes in my notepad of what you're saying to me so that I can go back and reflect on it later, so I can review it later. Sometimes I just make a mental note, but you don't want to just ignore it or brush it off. You actually want to take in what they're saying, so that you can do the very next thing, which is number 5. You can acknowledge the positives. Thank you for sharing this with me. I appreciate the fact that you do see that I'm trying. You see that I'm trying to complete the project based on, the requirements that have been given to us. It may not look exactly like what you were asking for. Like I said, I'm working on it, but I do acknowledge the fact that you said that I was doing a good job. Even though there's room for improvement here. So you want to acknowledge the positives. Going back to the example about someone, getting to know someone and they're they're basically saying, oh, but you're a bit moody, or you get angry quite often. Acknowledge the positive things that they said about you. Thank you for seeing the good in me. Thank you for seeing how I really do work hard to do my best, and how I'm friendly with people. And I understand, that you may have some issues, or that you see that there are some issues with, my mood or my personality or whatever. It's an example, but of this problem, this issue. And I will take that into consideration as I reflect more on it. Just acknowledge the positives and let the person know that you're not just shutting down, right? Okay. And with acknowledging the positives, you can do the sixth thing, which is simply saying thank you. Once someone finishes giving you criticism, feedback, say thank you. Say, well, I appreciate, thank you so much for sharing this with me. Obviously, it's not something that feels good at the moment. Who is going to feel good when someone is pointing out, the negatives, or when someone is receiving critiques or feedback in a way that it could be damaging, it could be hurtful, because hurting my ego or my pride or whatever. But I do appreciate you sharing this with me. I thank you for that. And I will take it under advisement. That's one of my favorite things to say. I will take it under advisement. I will consider this as I reflect upon, the conversation that we had, or as I reflect upon the feedback. Saying thank you does show maturity, and it also shows a bit of politeness, right? Just saying thank you. Don't say thanks and then walk off. Like, don't be salty. Be like, okay, thanks, and then just walk off, because that's not the same. It's not the same type of thank you, right? It's not the same type of appreciation. And some of you might say, well, I don't really appreciate receiving feedback, but think about the benefits of receiving feedback. Without feedback, you could continue going on throughout your job, throughout your career, throughout your relationships, throughout your friendships and associations and partnerships, thinking that you were doing everything right, thinking that the way that you operate is top tier, is the best thing. But the people around you may actually think that it is poor. They may not like it, and that could actually hinder you from progressing in the future or having other opportunities open up. So think about the benefits of receiving feedback. Feedback is an opportunity. Critique is an opportunity for you to be able to see areas of improvement that you may be blind to. And so seeing through the perspective or the eyes of someone else who, in reality, when someone gives you feedback or when someone critiques you, it's because they care. And they really do want to see you develop into the best version of yourself, regardless of the sphere of influence, right? Regardless of if we're talking about professional, personal, spiritual, what have you, relational. The person giving you feedback, they're doing it because they do care. They care. Okay, so think about the benefits of receiving feedback. And again, acknowledge the positives. Number 5, say thank you. Number 6. And the last thing to do when receiving criticism is to do something nice for yourself. Do something nice for yourself, and do it with the right intention, please. Don't be like, well, I'm going to go take myself out for ice cream because you just upset me. You just made me mad. No, not like that. I mean, do something nice for yourself, because let's be honest, receiving feedback, receiving criticism, okay, especially whether constructive, destructive, whatever, receiving criticism is not easy. Sometimes it really does hurt your feelings because you are thinking that you are doing the absolute best that you possibly can. And sometimes, to hear that your best isn't good enough, that your best isn't, up to par, that can be a hurtful thing. So you want to do something nice for yourself. Go for a walk. If you're not on a health tip and you're like, going for a walk, that ain't nothing nice. Okay, fine. And I'm not telling you to go on a full blown out shopping spree, but do something nice for yourself. Watch a movie, watch something that's funny to make you laugh. So even though the critique may be on your mind, even for just a moment. Temporarily, you can think about something else, and then you can come back and reflect in a better attitude or a better spirit. So doing something nice for yourself shows you that you care. And it kind of helps you to be a little bit lighter about the critique that you've received, instead of feeling heavy. Because sometimes, depending on the critique, depending on the situation, it can take a lot out of you emotionally. Okay. So again, let me just recap the 7 things, the 7 ways to receive criticism without getting defensive. The first thing is listen. Listen intently. Listen to learn, right? We listen to learn. The second thing is pause, then respond. Don't react. Okay. Pause, then respond. Don't react. The third thing is ask questions to better understand the feedback. Ask for specific examples, because you may have been blind. You may not have seen what the other person saw. And then number 4 is to actually listen. Don't ignore it. Don't avoid it. Don't brush it off. Make sure that you pay attention to what is said. And, even in this case, you might need to make a note, write it down, take notes, or make a mental note so that you can progress in the right area and that you won't make the same mistakes again. The 5th thing is acknowledge the positives. Take the positives, okay? Acknowledge them. Say, thank you for, which is number 6. So you want to acknowledge the positives, number 5, and say thank you to the person delivering the critique or the feedback, because it means that they care. It means that they care. And then lastly, do something nice for yourself. Do something nice, because I'm telling you, you're going to have like a bruised ego. You want to do something nice for yourself, right? And so that you can come back refreshed and still staying positive as you make steps toward the right direction in improving the issues that are being brought to the table. When you create a habit of regular positivity, you can better equip yourself to receive criticism and feedback in a more positive light. And I specifically have 31 affirmations to help you be able to transform your mind, so that as you receive feedback, you can go from receiving negative feedback, or seeing it in a negative light, to seeing it in a more positive light, something that will be able to help you to improve. And you can get those 31 powerful affirmations to transform your mind by visiting the link in the show notes below. And if you're watching this on YouTube, it's in the description box below. It is 31 powerful affirmations to transform your mind. Listen, I want to say thank you so much for tuning into the 29th episode of the Leaders Lab podcast. If you're watching the video version of the podcast, you see that I'm still in a hotel, which means I'm still away on business. But next week, your girl's going to be back home in the studio, and I'm super excited about that. But again, thank you so much for rocking with me, no matter where I am in the world. I appreciate it so much. Don't forget that you can connect with me on social media. You can find me anywhere and everywhere on social media at Dr. Charity TV. And if you connect with me on Facebook, you can go to at Dr. Charity TV page. Same for LinkedIn at Dr. Charity TV, YouTube, Instagram, Pinterest, and any other one, you can just go to at Dr. Charity TV. Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of the Leaders Lab podcast, and I will see you next week in the lab.
Thank you for listening to the Leaders Lab podcast. Visit our website at www.drcharitytv.com.